Good afternoon and welcome back to today's NASA Future Forum here at the University of Maryland College Park in the Riggs Alumni Center. For our final panel this afternoon, we have one of perhaps the best of all day. We have our panel on inspiration and education, building idea factories for the future. Our panel leader today is Michael Lach from the U.S. Department of Education. Michael?
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Great to be here. It's exciting to be part of this. I always get a kick out of whenever I get to do anything that's even remotely related to NASA. You guys have all the cool toys and all the fun things, so it's great to be here. I come from this as the special assistant to Secretary Duncan, focusing on STEM education issues in the Department of Education. And prior to that, I was a classroom teacher. I taught for almost 10 years in New Orleans, New York City, and Chicago, and then sold out and became a bureaucrat, leading curriculum instruction in the Chicago Public Schools for Arnie, and then I came with him when he came out here to DC. But it's great to be here. You're going to hear from some really exceptional people talking about how inspiration and education are really tightly linked and important pieces of the whole problem. You're going to hear about it from all different levels. We've got two university folks here, Mary Bowden and Mohammed Eltayeb, who both have engineering backgrounds and will speak to some of the higher ed perspective. Susan Bardenhagen is an elementary school teacher and also the regional director of the Virginia Science Teachers Association. And Leland Melvin leads NASA's education effort and has been a tremendous partner in all this work across the federal government moving forward. But you don't want to hear from me, let's hear from them. So why don't we start with you, Mary. Tell a little bit about where you're coming from and the expertise you provide here. And maybe it would be helpful to, since we're talking about inspiration, talk a little bit about how you decided to become a scientist. What inspired you?
Okay. Well, first let me introduce myself a little further. I'm actually a part-time faculty here at the University of Maryland in the Aerospace Engineering Department, and I'm also associated with the Space Systems Lab. And I'd like to point out that we have a number of displays out in the hallway of some of the undergraduate projects that are currently going on in the Space Systems Lab. And I'd encourage everybody to look at those on their way out. I think what I'd really like to start with is just to kind of put in perspective what my current passion is. I am involved in a number of undergraduate projects that have been ongoing through the years, and I'll get to the part of what actually inspired me originally afterwards. But I think what's so important is that these projects, I have come to realize without any question in my mind, the projects at the freshman and sophomore level tend to keep engineers in engineering because we lose some, and that's always sad. They choose to go to other disciplines, and that's okay, but we want to keep them in engineering as much as possible. And the projects at the upper level, in the sophomore and the junior and senior years, are also extremely effective and important because they're teaching engineers how to be more effective engineers. Real-world experience by doing hands-on engineering is essential, and just developing confidence in their own ability to think and to work through problems is also essential. And I think that is what is gained so much more from these projects than perhaps from sitting in a classroom listening to someone talk. So the projects are essential. The one I'd like to emphasize the most is a project that we have actually, that spans all 4 years for our undergraduates, and that's our balloon payload program. This is a program that was initiated in our department over 7 years ago, and I have to say I want to give full credit to the Maryland Space Grant Organization for initiating this project, because they sent me, I had no clue what was going on with this program, and they sent me to Colorado to learn how to build balloon payloads. Next thing I knew, I was expected to start a program of very similar nature at our university. So I did. And we are now 7 years into it with hundreds of students who have built payloads. We've launched 32 flights, getting ready to launch our 33rd flight tomorrow. And it has been a wonderful experience for the students to really get a feeling for what it is to build space, okay, near space hardware, launch it, fly it, get it back, see the results, analyze the data, and I think it's a wonderful sort of microcosm of a real launch experience. The Space Grant Organization is actually one that is spread over all 50 states and the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, and is just a tremendous network of universities and colleges where the primary purpose is to support and inspire engineering and science, education, and research and outreach, and it's just been a wonderful, in fact, an enabling organization for us to do not just this balloon payload project, but many others. I think the conclusion that I have come to is that the students who get the hands-on experience, not just with the balloon payloads, but we have, as you'll see in the hall, we have robots, we have had rocket payloads, we have had rovers and underwater submersibles, many, many projects. Some of them are competitions and some are not. All of these projects have been inspiring and educational and truly building confidence in our students. I would like to say, though, that not everything is perfect. This is not a perfect world, and one of my big concerns, I'll just voice it right now, is that many of these projects would not be feasible, would not be as successful, certainly as they are, without a laboratory. In this case, it's the Space Systems Lab, but there are many, many labs like this across the country. A lab that is doing cutting-edge, vibrant, active, let's be honest, funded research. And if that, if the lab cannot continue, doesn't continue to have funding, not only do we lose all of the output of the graduate students working in the lab, but these opportunities for undergraduates will go away as well. It's so essential to keep the university research going at a high level, and basically allowing the labs to inspire and educate the undergraduates. I think I should just say in closing, I've probably run out of time, more than run out of time, but let me just say that I'm a little bit embarrassed to say this, but when I was, showing my age, when I was a freshman in college, I honestly did not know what engineering was. I thought that engineers drove trains. Okay, so engineers do drive trains, but it's so much more than that, and it wasn't until I had a roommate my sophomore year who happened to be an engineer that I realized this is really neat. And you know what got me, I'm again a little embarrassed here because this is a sign, but what got me were the textbooks were so cool. They had pictures of real systems and real world problems. And I have, I can almost say the rest is history. From the time I saw the types of problems and the types of applications that you could study with engineering, I mean, it's to me, it's it's an infinite opportunity. There's so many things we can be doing, and we will do. I think that's all I really had to say.
Mohammed?
Well, thank you very much. I'm really very honored to be here today in this panel to discuss with the esteemed people about STEM education and how to inspire and motivate the students, the next generation, into the fields of sciences and technologies, and advanced technologies especially. I also hope to shed some light on some of the troubles and the challenges and the problems that we will be facing in trying to provide the factories of the future, in trying to provide the next generation innovators, the next generation explorers. I come from an academic arena. I do work for Frostburg State University as a faculty member. In addition to my involvement in teaching and research to some extent, I have also developed a special interest in pursuing STEM education for K through 12 students. I do direct the program at Frostburg State University. It's called the Center for Future Engineers. This is a very beautiful and wonderful program because it's directed towards the gifted and talented students in the state of Maryland. We've just recently opened up for the neighboring states in West Virginia and Pennsylvania. We try to recruit students at an early age, probably at grade 6 through 12, into some activities, experiential learning activities, experiments, challenging problems and challenging programs, because we believe that the best way to inspire a gifted and talented student is actually to face them with a challenge. That being said, I would like to also mention that although recent indicators and recent concerns about the nation's ability to produce the next generation innovators and the next generation academicians and the next generation explorers in the science and technology and engineering, these concerns led to a great investment in STEM education at college level and beyond, but unfortunately did not focus on trying to reach out for the brightest kids. The misconception here is that the brightest student would make it on their own. Well, actually they will not, unless we provide really challenging problems and difficult problems for them to keep them inspired and motivated. This is what we do at the Center for Future Engineers. We reach out for the gifted and talented students. We try to focus on providing challenging problems. NASA, of course, is one of our vehicles, the tools that we use, because we realized that as soon as we mention about space missions, for example, this year for Summer Center, which is part of our Center for Future Engineers activity, we developed a program we called Robotics on the Surface of the Moon. So we realized that robotics is a cool thing, the moon is a great thing. Join them together, robotics on the surface of the moon, is one wonderful, great thing too. It's like putting peanut butter and jelly together. And it was actually a great success. It was very, very, very cool program. Everybody liked it. We added a little bit of technical challenge because we wanted these robotics to be networked, that they can communicate and search for some kind of a mystery substance under the rockets of the moon. Students in that program were entering grade 9 through 12. Quite challenging. Some of these programs were initially developed for college students at their senior and junior level. In 3 weeks, we noticed that because of the inspiration, the amount of inspiration, the amount of motivation, the amount of zealism in those kids, they were able to program, develop, build, construct robotic systems that were able to complete the mission. Well, the trick here is before we did that, we showed a little documentary and a movie about the early Apollo missions. And we showed them how engineers did really great, cool things and how they reached their goals when the time was, it was very, very early stages of space programs. I kind of cheated a little bit because this is how I got myself into engineering and science. When I was little, growing, this is how I realized that engineering is cool, because I watched the documentary. I watched the movies about the early Apollo missions. NASA history and historical missions and current programs and current missions can be used as a great tool to inspire those kids, especially in these programs. Now, some of the problems and the challenges, and like my friend Mary here said, that the world is not perfect, is of course funding. These programs are actually dying because of the lack of funding. Why do we want to target specifically? We want to target all students and try to create the numbers that we want, the numbers that this country needs to cover the needs in fueling the economic and security needs in engineering. But we also want to focus on the gifted and talented students. They are also gifted and talented in other fields. And if we don't care for them, they would just simply go and find something else to do. I just was very surprised to learn that there's only $8 million in the federal budget for gifted and talented students in the United States. Remember that these are the kids that are going to participate in NASA great missions of the future, the gifted and talented ones. There's no money, unfortunately, earmarked for gifted and talented students in the state of Maryland, where we actually operate. With that, we are considered to be one of the few lucky centers in the state of Maryland that are still surviving because of some corporate sponsorship, and we don't know actually what would be the future for the center. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate that NASA past achievements and current achievements are a great tool and vehicle to inspire and motivate the future of our engineers. Through funds from NASA and other corporations, we were able to generate these programs. When we challenge the gifted and talented students beyond their capacity, we're not actually challenging them beyond their capacity, we are pushing the limit. And when we do so, we are preparing the great engineers of the future. With that, I would like to yield it.
Let's go to Susan.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Bardenhagen. I am a classroom educator. I am the oldest of 4 daughters, and in looking at the careers that we all took, being the oldest, I went into the traditional role that someone involved in STEM education would be involved with, and that is being a teacher. My next sister is a physical therapist assistant. The medical profession is another place where you find a lot of females. My third sister really wanted to be a veterinarian, but she has her own horse farm and is an entrepreneur with everything that she does. And my youngest sister is a chemical engineer. She also went back to school and got her degree in becoming a financial analyst, so she can take on both roles. First, when she worked for Arco Oil Company, she not only could do the chemical engineering, but she was able to do the financial analyst and know what she was talking about in that particular role. She's now working, I'm proud to say, with alternative energy forces, and actually came to talk to my students about the new book that she was a contributing editor for on wind energy. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, we're four daughters, but we didn't know that there was anything unusual about us being girls that were interested in doing stuff until we each went to college armed with our flat-bladed and Phillips head screwdrivers, and everybody knew that if they needed anything fixed or that we could do it. We didn't think that was unusual, and it was just the way that my mom and dad brought us up. And I mean, I remember Mary was talking about the engineer. I thought an engineer too when I was in high school and college was someone who was the engineer for the train. I remember the sonic booms from Grumman Air Force Base on Long Island, and we were always wondering what those things were, and kind of being afraid, but thinking they were interesting. But the defining moment for me as far as interest in space came in '62 when John Glenn did his 3 orbits. And they, at the time, in school, they broadcasted on the PA system. There were no televisions in the classroom. I mean, we were still watching black and white. And I remember being so interested in that and telling my mom that I wanted to cut out all the articles and everything, and she actually gave up her treasured scrapbook that her big brother had brought back and let me put some pictures in hers. And because it's so little, you can see it just, I have this little thing of the ticker tape parade, and I saved it. And then I started collecting bigger things and putting them on poster boards. So I have Gordon Cooper and a few others. And that kept my interest in space, but I never aspired to become an astronaut until I became a teacher. And I still tell my students that when I grow up, I want to be an astronaut, and because I teach elementary school, they look at me and say, well, you are grown up. And that brings me to what I think has me sitting here today, and the fact that I am still so excited about everything that's out there to learn. I relate to the students what it was like when I was their age, so that they can get it's very difficult and abstract for them to understand how much technology has grown just in the 58 years that I've been on the planet, and for them to understand that there were no black and white television. I mean, there were only black and white televisions, that at 12 midnight, the signal came on and there wasn't anything on after that. No cell phones, the dial. And I tell them the things that I did in science. Now, I got to thinking today, and I took some notes as to what kinds of things I remember from my teaching, from being taught as a student. I remember doing a science project on brine shrimp, whether or not they preferred certain colored lights. And so I took over my dad's workshop in the basement and had all these different colored lights set up. And I remember doing that project. I remember my 5th grade teacher requiring us to keep a nature log and go out and find this particular spot that we'd have to go visit at least once a week, maybe longer, for the whole school year through all 4 seasons, and record information and data about the flora and fauna and everything that was going on. And somewhere packed in a box somewhere, I still have the leaves in these little, what they were then the plastic sleeves that you could protect things in. And I still have my students do that. I've had my 3rd through my 8th graders keep nature logs and do the observations. When I look at the things with which I've become involved, I think it's because of all the things that NASA has had out there, NOAA has had out there, and the fact that I am still a big kid that loves learning. I mean, when I was approached to be part of the panel today, it was because I don't know if I'm the only, but I'm one of the few classroom teachers who signed up to be part of this today. And then the rest is history. To just let you know a few of the things that keep me going with math and science. There's an organization called the Federation of Galaxy Explorers. There are 2 displays outside for you to look at. It was started in 2002 by an engineer, a space person who was so interested in space and wanted to get that message across and inspire kids. And I've been a mission team leader since 2003. And one of the most exciting things is to see young 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders who have so many questions that we don't get to a lot of the stuff that's on the meeting because they just want to know. And if we don't know the answers, we find it out and they investigate and they see me at school and they'll come back and say. The awe that's in their face is probably when I was sitting there in 3rd grade listening to John Glenn and getting inspired. Galaxy Explorers is a great way. We have moon-based teams. We've updated to the fact now where they have simulations, where we have suits that were created by the same company that does NASA, so the kids get to dress up in their little helmets and their white suits, and we made gloves for them and spongy boots so that they can feel what they're doing, and they actually do a moon base where they look for meteorites and possibly have a solar flare, and they have to go in and protect each other and it's a team thing, and it's just so exciting to have it involved. And that's one of the things that I work with that specifically related to space. There's another program that I just got involved with this year called the Real World Design Challenge, and that takes high school students and gives them a project to solve, a problem they have to work together as a team. It's totally funded by outside sources. The people that put it together, it's unbelievable what these kids would do. And the final challenge where they compete is in Washington, D.C., and it's held at the Air and Space Museum. When they're done, we have a reception. And to see these young kids, many of whom are going to go into STEM-related fields, working together on high-powered physics and engineering and coming up with everything they need to do, it's phenomenal. The lieutenant governors, a bill was passed and a resolution that all of the states are going to participate, and it's run through the lieutenant governor's office. That'll be coming up starting in the fall. Another thing that I'm actively involved in has to do with the female and the gender side of where I came to be, and that is through a conference called Girls Plus Math Plus Science Equals Success. It was started on the West Coast in 1990. On the East Coast, they have a lot of conferences called Girls Excelling at Math and Science, so it's GEMS. Again, it's math and science based from the early 90s as opposed to STEM, but we've now updated it so it includes STEM. And it's a career conference for the young people, grades 5 through high school, to see role models. If I were to say the two biggest things that I would think educators need to do is they need to provide role models, whether it's the teacher themselves or the people that they bring into the classroom through careers or conferences, that kids actually get to see other people like themselves, whether it be minorities, females, people with handicapping conditions, people of different ethnicities, and that empowers them to say, oh, well, I can do that too. And the conference is co-sponsored by the American Association of University Women, and I can say when I first heard about it, it's kind of a similar story to Mary. I thought the American Association of University Women, okay, were the wives of professors. When I first heard about it 25 years ago, and why there was nothing else to make me think anything different. And so, come a long way. The first year that conference happened, I couldn't be a presenter because they only wanted non-traditional roles for women. So a teacher was not one. My sister working in the physical therapy field, no, not really. But my youngest sister, the chemical engineer in 1991, her presentation was called Hard Hat and a Dress. Because when she first got her job working for the utility company, it was business dress. They didn't know what to do with a female. So they made her wear a dress, but she had to wear steel-toed shoes and a hard hat until they figured out what was appropriate. And gosh, that's only 20 years ago. So, okay, 1991, I made a mistake. The other thing that's coming up is the 2012 United States of America Science and Engineering Conference. Many of you have already talked to me about it today because you saw the flyers outside. Last year it was on 10-10-10. They even had some music that was created, which is another part near and dear to my heart because I play violin in a symphony orchestra. The bringing of all the STEM and across the country, I encourage you to check it out and see what's going on. There are packets banded out on the table. I saw many of you just pulling out one or two. There are 3 more boxes of those. Those are called save the date things to get people involved all across the country. Just because the final thing is going to happen in DC doesn't mean there aren't all of these things we've been talking about today. Partnering with businesses, bringing mentors in, bringing scientists into the classroom, having kids email questions to different scientists, field trips, and just getting everybody involved. And the reason I'm here today is because of AIAA, the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics. I am an educator associate. It's free, and they invite me to all these different things. I got to have a reception at the British Embassy for the Royal Aeronautics Society to talk about things that were happening. And there's just so many things out there that don't cost money for me per se as much as it's an investment. Thinking about the last panel. Yes, it's an investment for the different organizations to get together, but then to provide that for teachers so that we can then be excited and go back to the classroom and get kids excited and try to get other teachers involved is oh so important. And that brings me to the final thing that I want to say is my concern is that, especially at the elementary level, of having people who are knowledgeable about the content, and if they're not knowledgeable, still teaching it and finding out how to make the kids interested and learning with the kids to do the research. I worry that we don't get the kids started enough, early enough, because we've become so focused on testing. And that language arts and math are in the forefront, and that's what you're going to be judged at. So with that, I will pass it on to an education person with NASA, to Michael.
Leland, why don't you give a little bit of background, but I think folks have already heard a little bit about you, and then we'll dive into some questions.
Okay, middle school parents inspired me, gave me tools to help me create things that fuel my curiosity, and that allowed me to become an astronaut eventually. Flew in space a couple of times, and my second flight, I realized how impactful talking to kids from the International Space Station was, because we did a radio show on the Tom Joyner Show, which the market is about 7 million people in the African American community. And when I got back from space, there were mothers and fathers that were emailing me and writing me to tell me when they were driving their kids to work that morning, there were 2 African American astronauts in space who were calling down and talking to Tom Joyner, and their kid wanted to become an astronaut instantly on that day. They had never been interested in science or math, but they heard this show and they were so inspired. So over my 12 years as being an astronaut, now the Associate Administrator for Education, I've probably talked to close to 500,000 students. And we have to find the ways to reach all students. We talk about diversity and access. We've got to figure out a way so that every student has an opportunity to make that choice. And so that's something that, Michael, that we've been trying to do with programs like Summer of Innovation and 21st Century Learning, all the assets that NASA has at its disposal to help inspire and motivate everyone. So.
Great, thank you all. So we're starting to get some questions in from our Twitter feed, and I think there'll be some questions from the audience. Please keep those coming. I'm going to begin with this one, which gets at something, Susan, I think you touched on a little bit. How does today's focus on grades and test scores and tenure rules, I editorialized both at the K-12 level and at the higher ed level, impact how students are prepared for college and interested in careers in STEM? Go ahead, Susan, and then others chime in. Yeah.
Alluded, there is so much pressure on test scores that oftentimes, especially teachers just coming out of college, they are told, well, you've got to make sure that your students perform. And because the emphasis is so much on language arts and math, and yes, math is part of STEM, but it's more for taking the test, multiple choice, and things like that. It's not getting into the critical thinking and all the kinds of things that we know math needs to have in order to support science and to support a good, healthy student. And it's very hard. You can see from the program how long I've been teaching. I still encounter people who have a hard time with the fact that I'm integrating and talking about all different kinds of things while I'm teaching, and bringing in hands-on and having the kids discover, instead of taking the teacher's guide that says, this is what the lesson is today, I gave my kids a box of wires and light bulbs and batteries and said, okay, make them light, see what you can do. And within 10 minutes, not only did they have them lit, but the ones who didn't were showing the other kids why theirs wasn't lighting up, because they would all come tell me the batteries were dead. They didn't know about having positive and negative. But they discovered it on their own, and then they could teach the other ones. And then they wanted to go on from there. And people are afraid that if you don't teach exactly what's there, uh-oh, I'm not going to be okay. So I still have to prove myself every year. My kids do really well on their test scores and on other things as well, not just that. But that's the hard thing right now. They're so concerned, and justifiably so. In a lot of states, you are held accountable for how well your kids do on test scores. So.
Anyone? Yeah, go ahead. Of course, just chime in.
I think there's an equivalent sort of phenomenon that goes on at the university level, which is that we have a cadre of honors students who are very concerned about GPA and doing as well as possible on all their exams, of course, which is a wonderful thing. And there are times when these absolute top-notch students are basically getting the message that doesn't matter if you do any hands-on stuff for an engineering undergraduate curriculum. What matters is doing well on the exams, getting A's in your courses. And fortunately, that is taken care of somewhat by most engineering programs. Certainly ours has a capstone design requirement, where in our case, we usually try to do some hands-on engineering. But it is perfectly possible, in fact, it used to be the case, especially in space, on the space side of aerospace engineering, that we would have students go through an entire 4-year program and truly never use a wrench, never get their hands dirty. The senior design effort was analysis and theoretical and paper studies. And I think it's unfortunate. This has resulted in a rule that my husband, who happens to be a professor here at the university as well, when he's looking for graduate students, he does not want the 4.0s. He doesn't necessarily want students who have the top GPA. He wants the students with 3.5 to 3.8 who have the experience with projects. And what I'm seeing more and more is companies are sort of have the same attitude. Everybody will love a person with a 4.0 GPA. Don't get me wrong. But the ones that have maybe a slightly lower GPA but have experience with hands-on projects, that's what we want to get. That's what's really valuable.
I just wanted to add one thing. The problem here is, in my opinion, is not just the trying to reach the highest grade possible, because that may be a motivational thing for some students. It's the problem when this becomes the goal and the objective from the learning procedure or the learning process itself. There's part that is considered to be principles and theory, and there's part that is practical, and everybody ought to be doing well, and probably grading is the one of the ways to assess how, at least up to this point, I didn't see anything that works better than that, to assess how the students are doing well. But the problem is when they put their goal onto getting the highest grade, not learning, and then finding out what the effect of their learning on their grade is.
I want to sort of shift a little bit. We heard each of the panels talk a bit about how they got inspired, and Leland, your story about the Tom Joyner show, that's a pretty exciting story. Can you all now talk a little bit about, after that moment of inspiration, what do we have to do to keep kids engaged? Because a single moment, a single radio show is great, but what do we have to do to keep those kids engaged, over the course of their educational experience? What works and what doesn't work?
I think one of the things that NASA can do, we've been charged to look at the entire pipeline from K to Gray, but, I don't think, with budgetary constraints and so forth, that we can cover the entire pipeline and take that to scale at the same time. So it's very important, as I mentioned earlier, that we have strategic partners that we partner with that say, take a portion of that pipeline, and we all work together to make sure that those kids are getting the fundamentals they need. But also it's the teachers, in the earlier grades that aren't necessarily trained to be scientists or engineers, but they're teaching science. So how does NASA engage these maybe middle school teachers? Because if they're not as motivated as, say, you, Susan, there's a deficit there for them maybe understanding some of the things that the kids need to learn to turn them on to be scientists and engineers. So if we can use the federal space to help maybe some of those teachers, and like I said, we flew this, we had teachers flying on this microgravity plane a couple of weeks ago, and they were doing experiments and learning, experiential hands-on things that they probably didn't do in a classroom before this. And the re-engagement of the teachers and the students, and then keeping them engaged throughout the NASA pipeline. Dr. Mabel Matthews has set up something called One-Stop Shopping Initiative, where if you go to intern.nasa.gov, a student can get into the NASA pipeline and see what opportunities are available. Right now it's for our high school and college students, but if we extended this down into the middle school and elementary school, then we could attach, we don't have to get parental consent, but attach an ID to a student and be able to blast them out all the opportunities throughout their career, throughout their pipeline, and then they could see all the NASA type related activities that they could do, and to keep them re-engaged into missions that are going up, Juno, Grail, all the things that are happening with NASA, the really cool stuff, then they could find out about it throughout their entire pipeline, and also the resources for, you know, graduate school and beyond.
Anyone else?
I
Go ahead.
think keeping them involved, once you've realized that spark, I found it effective that you find out from kids at the beginning of the school year the things in which they're interested, no matter what it is, even if it's favorite colors at the youngest level, and who their icons are. That was an eye-opening experience as well. I remember doing that. And then once you find that there's that spark, then you can put them into different places. There have been lots of programs that support kids in what they're interested. A lot of it has to do with the grants. And I got a grant through the Virginia Space Grant Consortium, and it was how to do better with the gender-based programs for STEM in schools. And it was amazing to see the teachers who would sit there and talk about something that was obvious, but it didn't, until they got to brainstorm together. The synergistic approach just was amazing. I had an apprentice program for 3rd through 5th graders. Once we knew that they were interested in stuff, more than just a career day, they actually got to sit down and work with scientists, working with peers, or just a little bit older. When the robotics team comes in from the high school or middle school to the elementary school, these kids, you can't stop. You know, that would maintain it because they see that it's out there and it's attainable and it's closer to them, as opposed to somebody that may be 25 years older than them. They have somebody that's just to them, one of their peers. So,
Mary, did you want to chime in? And then we've got a couple
Real
questions
quick,
from the audience too.
I think I'd just like to add that I have a little bit of a concern that students in the grade school do projects and they find out that engineering is fun, and that's wonderful, but they also think sometimes that engineering is just fun and that it's easy, maybe too easy. And some of these students will come into a freshman year in an engineering program and suddenly they find that engineering is hard. It's very difficult. There's a lot of work to it. And I make a point at the beginning of every freshman course that I teach to say, yes, engineering is very hard. Engineering is tremendously difficult. If it weren't hard, everybody would be doing it. But there's another part to this message, which is that anyone, I believe, can be an engineer if you work hard enough. And what we provide, what we try to provide, and I think one of the important things is when students get into STEM, it's not just the getting in, they have to have the support when they're struggling and when they're working hard and they're not figuring things out. It's very important to, I'm talking at the university level, to have these students have a whole support system of their peers and of teaching assistants and of faculty who are there to answer questions and help them through the process. The support system is essential once they're in and inspired and ready to go. You got to have the support system.
How about the gentleman in the back there standing up at the microphone? You have a question for us?
Yeah. Again, I'm Greg Schuckman from the University of Central Florida. Before I was at UCF, I was with the American Association of Engineering Societies, and so spent a lot of time looking at the workforce issues. And we also had the Engineering Workforce Commission, which had longitudinal data going back to the 50s in terms of degrees and enrollments. So I'd looked at 86 to 96 was at AES, and then when I went to UCF, I said, let me look at how things have gone from 2006. And what was interesting is that over those 20 years, the number of students who had earned baccalaureate degrees in all fields had gone up over 50% in the US. The number of students who had earned baccalaureate degrees in engineering over that same period went down almost 3%. And I looked at it state by state. Maryland happens to be one of the winners. We went up 37% during that time. But in getting to your point, Leland, when you look at the representation of the engineering workforce and the engineering students, 57% of the undergraduates today are women. And we struggled to hit that 20% mark for women in engineering programs. It's even worse for underrepresented students in African Americans and Hispanics. When you go up to graduate level, it becomes worse. So the question is, how do you reach out, getting to your point about really digging down into the grades, not even middle school, but elementary school. I remember a study from the National Science Foundation years ago, and they looked at when girls made the choice of whether to go to a STEM-oriented career or a non-STEM-oriented career. And it was 12 years old. It was the 6th grade. So basically, if you didn't get them by that point, they were already going to be off the rails in terms of having the coursework and the preparation they needed to succeed in a very rigorous STEM career. So when you talk about all these different outreach and the strategic partners, NASA is probably the most exciting federal agency program of any. I mean, what's more exciting than being able to go beyond? And so I guess my question is, informal science education has taken a real hit in the budget. And so we do need to rely on these partnerships more and more between government and industry and academia and the media. Do you have a plan for reaching out, especially to those younger students and the parents of those younger students, to help them become more engaged in a STEM career, particularly for women and minorities?
Yeah, NASA currently has a program called SEMA, which actually it's for underrepresented, underserved students, that reaches out not only to the students in the younger ages, but also to their parents, to bring the parents to a SEMA session to let the parents know that you don't have to be an engineer to raise an engineer. And I think a lot of times our parents or the adults are the worst advocate for STEM education because, first of all, they already think it's hard. They can't do it. I don't know math. I don't know science. So if I don't know it, then you're not going to know it, and the kids get turned off to it. So they need people that are able to, spread that message that even look like them. Because I've talked to so many kids that say, well, how did you become an astronaut? You don't have a military crew cut. So they first think you have to be a military person. But then they see the other side and, oh, well, I don't see many black astronauts, or I don't see many female astronauts. And that part of it, you have to really drill down and let the kids see someone that looks like them. So that's media. That's partnering with entertainment industry council. That's partnering with, your entertainers and your ball players, because those are the people that are visible. So the SEMA program, we have, other programs that we're trying, Summer of Innovation, reaching underrepresented, underserved, but you just got to keep that exposure. You got to keep going at it. And the partnership pieces is so critical because you need mentors also, that as you get through the pipeline, if you're not engaged with the programs, and you need someone that's going to keep at them. I mean, even in college and undergraduate and graduate, and having a mentor that's just helping you show the ropes. So I think those are some of the things that can help.
Great, thank you.
How about this gentleman up at the front here?
My name's Chuck Devine. 2 positions, one I currently, the title is called Member at Large in Metro Washington Mensa. Yeah, I know a lot about gifted and talented, and I'm learning more all the time. A few years back, I was leading a committee as part of the Governor's Workforce Investment Board here on aerospace initiative and industry collaboration. One of the things that we talk about in our circles is the need for various kinds of reform. Like a few years back, I found out that 4,000 students are being homeschooled in Montgomery County because the parents of bright students don't like what they're seeing happening to their bright students in school, with everything ranging from poor teachers to abusive bullying in the schools. And one of the real issues in STEM fields in general seems to be a growingly worse work-life balance. Do any of you people talk about needs for various reforms in either education or in management of tech fields?
I mean, I can assure you it's something we spend a lot of time thinking about at the Department of Education. And would argue that the initiatives that we have launched are really designed to change the whole system. So they are long-term plays. They are not the sort of things that will change in 2 years or one term, but raising standards for all kids, recruiting, preparing, and supporting great teachers and leaders all over the place, better data throughout the whole system so decisions can be made at scale with confidence at all levels of the system, and then really for moral issues, finally paying attention to and making changes in the places that need it most, the schools that have been failing kids for years and years and years. We're finally saying, hey, we need to do something about that. It's not okay to keep that going.
I agree with that little sentence that you mentioned about reform, and I would like to also add that the reform should also include reforming curriculum as well, because right now what we see is when we receive those students at the college level, many of them actually do come with a level in STEM field material that is less than adequate for them to even pursue a serious career in that field, and we struggle with that. They come in with the notion that the field is quite exciting and easy, and it's not a big problem because there's so much emphasis on just the fun part of it and not on the actual strong educational component that comes with it. I mean, everybody knows that any subject, whether it is a scientific subject or even a sport, needs a lot of practice and a lot of work and a lot of sweat, and we have to implant that at that level. So the reform should be in that, and also the training of the teachers and many of these things that are probably very well covered.
I'll follow up with one observation. Some of us are starting to complain a lot, particularly in IT fields. You can't do hard work if you're only getting 4 hours of sleep a night, and that's what some places are trying to demand.
We have time for one more question here before we wrap up. Here in the back, sir.
Thank you. My name is Stephen Peterson. I teach exploring space to juniors in high school. Last month, I had a golden opportunity to go to a Teachers in Space workshop, which opened up a world of new information. Last year, when I was teaching this course, I discovered that the students really opened up when we taught them the little stuff. For instance, I would walk them through the space shuttle launch from the 2 hours before to the time they reach orbit. Coming from the workshop, what I really could use from NASA, and throughout the day they said, tell us what we can help you with, is the little stuff. The big stuff they get, okay, that's good. When you start talking about that little stuff, they get excited. And let me give you an example. It'd be nice for me to tell them how an astronaut preps from the time of pre-brief to purging his body. I don't know all the details. I've heard it, but I can't remember. To doing the EVA and coming back in again. It's those little things they really get excited about because they had no clue all that little stuff went on. So how do I get that information so I can present it to the students to get them excited?
Call me. We have quite a bit of information on, I know, the JSC, Johnson Space Center homepage about some of those little pieces of how you go to the bathroom in space, how do you do different things. There are websites, the NASA website, nasa.gov/education has little stories, but they're not all in a central location. So that's something that we're also trying to get more of an infrastructure for selecting video clips, selecting information on these types of things, the little stuff, so that kids can see what's going on to, take them from, 3, 2, 1, liftoff to coming home, that whole cycle. But I'll give you my card when we're done.
Thank you, sir.
But I want to make a comment in the Women in Aerospace are planning a STEM event here at the University of Maryland the last week in November or the first week in December. And I don't know exactly what all's on the agenda. I know there will be panels, there will be a career fair and this sort of thing. And it's being sponsored jointly too by the Maryland Space Business Roundtable and the AIAA and maybe some others. And I thought some of you might be interested in attending, but I'm not sure how they're going to get the word out yet.
Thank you.
Very good. Any other concluding comments from our panel?
Can I say one thing that just follow up this this question or this comment about how interested students can get in learning the real, details of doing something like a spacewalk. We actually teach a graduate course that goes into the details, and it is tremendously complicated, the sort of body chemistry effects that have to be dealt with. But I think you don't have to go to that level to be really psyched, but what you do need to have is humans in space. And I don't really know where our future in space is, but I personally, and I think I hear this from so many kids, we've got to have humans out there. We've got to have humans in space to really inspire and to really, give students. Yeah, I'm glad you agree. Apparently not everybody agrees, but that's okay. But I feel like that's the crux of the matter.
And Mary, that is the plan, to continue with humans in space.
Right on.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for your wonderful thoughts. That concludes our panel discussion. We have some closing remarks from Dr. Michael Gazarek. Mike is our Deputy Chief Technologist at NASA headquarters in Washington. Mike?
Well, good afternoon. I hope you've had a great day here. I've been back at the headquarters in D.C. while you guys have been having this fun, but I've watched most of it, on the web stream, and it's been awesome. It's been awesome. But I will say, on the way in here, as I passed a parking attendant, I was told to fear the turtle. So I don't know what that means, but maybe some students can kind of help me out with what that means. Being here live, apparently, there's something to be careful about. I think we heard many interesting points of view today, and really, as you know, that's the point of this, right? It's really for us to listen and to have a dialogue about the kinds of things that we NASA are doing. And we greatly value your input, and that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have a forum such as this. We want to thank a number of people for today, first of which would be the panelists for taking time and energy and coming down today to participate. We want to thank especially the students from the University of Maryland in robotics and engineering. For many of you who have seen the displays out in the hallway, fantastic and great stuff. We want to thank Charlie Bowden for kicking us off. He starts a lot of things, and I think he started it off this whole forum today. Listening to it on the stream was a great way to get a day like today started. In addition, we want to thank Congressman Edwards. Her remarks, I thought, were incredible, and her stories that she brought really kind of set the foundation for the day. I really enjoyed that. And her, for me personally, her mentioning of the infrared camera, the use for that for energy efficiency, that really hit home for me. And working with Melvin I worked on an infrared camera that is now used by astronauts on the International Space Station. It's a handheld device. And as a matter of fact, I was at a conference years ago presenting on the use of this infrared technology for the use on the International Space Station. And it was a conference that was mainly for people that she mentioned, people in the industry for energy efficiency. I was just as fascinated as their use of it for understanding energy efficiency in my home as they were about learning how infrared cameras and the things that they use are in space. Finally, I want to thank really you, everyone here, for taking the time and the energy and staying with us for a very long day. I want to thank you for your interest and your passion and you're caring for what we do at NASA. I also want to thank for those that are on TV and from the stream like I was, being able to listen and to learn from home. We're going to have another one. Our next event, our next forum is planned for October 21st. That's a tentative date. And that won't have anything to do with turtles. In fact, it will be at the Ohio State University in the land of the Buckeyes. You can watch our website at www.nasa.gov/OCT for further information on that forum. So let me just close with a couple key messages, that we heard today. First of all, I want to say that we heard you. We have a whole series of messages and notes that we heard. And you certainly, I can say, I think for most of the panelists, you have made us think. And you made us pause about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And we need now some time to go reflect on that and then turn that into action. One of the things we heard is that NASA, we don't promote ourselves very well. I suppose many of you heard the joke about the engineers and the difference about looking down at their shoes versus your shoes. So I think a lot of us suffer for that. We're really good engineers, but not so much perhaps about promoting and marketing. So we hear that, and we have more work to do in that arena. We learned, I think we do a lot of good work, but no one knows. And so telling our story and telling about a lot of the great things that we do, in addition to just what you see, in human spaceflight and with astronauts, in addition to that, within science, with engineering and technology across the fronts, we have a lot to tell, and we'll continue to work on that. So in short, I'm going to borrow a little bit from Hank Green. Today you helped us increase the awesome of NASA, and for that we thank you. I want to close by just repeating, I thought was a great line from Congressman Edwards, and that's one that really kind of stuck with me as I listened to it on the stream, and that is, a nation is only as strong as its investments in technology and the future. Thank you very much.